Let the rage in the comments begin. I've been playing Cata. I've been playing it for one reason, and that's to get up to scratch and remember everything that I forgot about Cata to get you guys ready for when Cata Classic inevitably comes. That genuinely was the reason I started playing. It was to level everything to 85, raid on everything, do every single profession, do every single quest in like the new zones of Cata, and then be able to create content for it early before the game comes out, so it's all there ready for you to consume at your own pace. The thing is, I'm actually just doing it for me now because I'm really, really enjoying it. And if you want to see how much I'm enjoying it, shameless plug, you can come and watch me play it over on twitch.tv/Scottejaye87. But first, just a quick word from the sponsor of today's video. By now, everybody is familiar with remote desktop, and if your server suffered with queues at launch or even when the new phases release, you know this is the best way to beat the queue without being at your PC. Orsun Remote is the perfect software to control your PC from your iPhone or Android device, and let's face it, with how geared we are at this point of the expansion, you don't need to press many buttons to go out and farm. But you could even use this to do some fishing or auction house browsing. Orsun is incredibly easy to set up. You just download the software to your PC and then the app to your iPhone or Android device. There's lots of features included in the free version, but I personally would recommend the game version because the game version comes with even more powerful features. If you go for the Pro version, it will work on your Android device, whereas the free version works on iPhones. But if you go for the game version, you get full mobile phone remote control PC to play any game you want from your PC to your phone. You get a fully customizable keyboard on screen to be as minimalistic or cluttered as you want, enabling you to have as many keybinds in-game as you need. It has full sound transfer so you can hear everything through your phone from your PC. There's various views such as a game view or even a 3D game perspective view. There's many presets for key maps and screen layouts for popular games, and one of them is actually World of Warcraft, which is incredibly handy. It's got support up to 144 FPS, and you can control your desktop from your phone or even mirror your phone to your PC if you wanted to easily capture content from your phone, maybe to your Discord or even a live stream. And if you don't like the thought of leaving your PC on when you're not at home, then they even do a smart plug as well, which is available on Amazon. Using this smart plug, you can wake up or send your PC to sleep at the touch of a button, making remote control even more accessible with less downsides. So thanks for sponsoring the video, and no to all of you that are thinking, oh, you can get banned for remote desktop. No, you can't. I've always been straight with everyone on stream and told them that the end of Mr. Pandaria would be my cut-off for Classic. That's when Classic would be no more for me. And I've always said I would really only be playing Cataclysm to get to Mr. Pandaria. The same way I only really played TBC to get to Wrath of the Lich King. But I genuinely am extremely surprised just how classic Cata actually feels. It isn't these wild jumps towards retail that everyone talks about, and I've even said it myself in the past that Cata was where it started to go downhill in terms of those steps towards retail. But actually, I would say Cataclysm is that fine balance between those retail systems and having that classic feeling. And I would say one of the biggest reasons for that is the nostalgia that's attached to Cataclysm in regards to being back home. And when I say home, I mean Kalimdor and Eastern Kingdoms. There is no new continent. There's a few new zones that are outside of the continent, mainly referring to inside the Maelstrom. So you've got one high-level zone, which is Deepholm, and then you've got the starting area for the goblins. But outside of that, everything takes place in the old world. Yes, you can fly around in the old world, which actually I really like. I thought it was going to be one of the things that I remembered hating. But in fact, being able to fly all over the zones that you have been stuck in since 2019 feels pretty good. And when I say Cata has still got that classic feeling, the reason I say that is because the vast majority of the specs play very similar to how they do in Wrath, just with some extra layers of difficulty to the rotations or the priority systems, which actually make them just feel more engaging. Take Ret Paladin, for example, having their own buff they have to keep up in the form of Inquisition, which makes it feel very close to a Feral, keeping up Savage Roar. The addition of some beefy DPS cooldowns making it feel more complex and rewarding, but also then cutting down on the annoying things like small and big blessings and condensing it all down into 2 blessings, which is Kings and Might. And even Kings isn't needed if you have a Druid, because it's the same as Mark of the Wild. There's a lot of this homogenization across the board, which is where people say it's a big step towards retail, but it really only affects buffs and debuffs. The classes actually feel so much more satisfying to play. A hunter being another prime example with the addition of focus instead of mana. You still have a resource to manage, but now it's focus instead of mana, and it just feels like it plays better. It feels like a more fleshed out class. The whole shift in difficulty for 5-man heroics, making mechanics extremely punishing, is also a whole lot of fun when doing them for the first time. And don't get me started on dead mines. The whole gauntlet event at the end of the dungeon is a work of art. It really is. And all of the heroics are actually really well designed. And as I say, they are mechanically punishing, but in a good way. It does make you a better player. You can't just go in and mindlessly spam AoE and cleave your way through a dungeon. You do have to pay attention to those priority interrupts that you need on mobs, or they're going to wipe the raid. Boss mechanics actually matter. You do need to move out of bad things. And ultimately, yes, it's more difficult, but it just does make it far more rewarding when it drops one of those items once you've killed it. It's not all sunshine and roses, though. There are quite a few things I'm not a fan of at all. The main one being the ridiculous power spike between 80 and 85. The stat bloat becomes so noticeable and honestly not welcome by me, and it reminds me why there needed to be a stat squish further down the line. Just using my paladin as an example, I'm a holy paladin with 110,000 health. It's a ridiculous jump from 80 to 85 and almost just doesn't need to be that much. But when it comes to Cataclysm, they're not going to be able to do a lot about it. It will have to stay the same because otherwise they would have to tune every single boss, every single dungeon, every single quest mob. It would be an absolute nightmare. So you just have to sort of accept the fact that every health pool is going to be higher, all damage we deal is going to be higher, and all that sort of thing, which it's like incredibly higher. You know, you're talking like in 5-man dungeons, you got unholy DKs doing 35, 40k single target DPS. It's that big of a difference. But it's something you get used to. The other thing, especially coming from a Holy Paladin perspective, is the lack of spell power on gear. Everything spell power related just scales directly from intellect now. In fact, the only item you'll see spell power on in most cases is your weapon. It just feels a bit strange. When you look at all my other gear here, everything is just crit or haste or mastery or haste and mastery or spirit and mastery. There's no spell power at all. And that's purely because when you actually look at intellect now increases your mana like we're used to it doing, but it also now increases spell power as well as increasing spell critical hit, as we're used to it doing as well. So it can make gearing a little bit boring because you've not really got these big decisions to make on what item to use outside of secondary stats. And added on top of this, the fact that it adds Reforging as well, which by the way, I'm a big fan of. I do like Reforging because it makes gear that you ordinarily wouldn't want to take. It gives it a chance at being useful. But with that addition of Reforging, it can just make gearing maybe seem a little bit boring because it's like, oh, it's a plate head, I'm gonna take it. Because even though it's got crit and I want haste, I can just reforge like 40% of that crit into haste, and now all of a sudden it's not that bad. But then it also does make gear not go to waste, which is the thing I like about it. Like this neck as an example, I don't really want mastery, I want spirit and haste. So being able to get it anyway and just reforge some of the mastery off for haste means that it's a worthwhile upgrade. This also does mean you can get items that would take you over the hit cap, for example, and then you can just reforge some hit off of your items to get more secondary stats. So it can make it more interesting. But I find the big benefit to it is everything is an upgrade. If it's more item level, everything can be a potential upgrade because we're not in that sort of now Wrath era where you would not take an item that's got expertise on because you're already over the expertise cap. Now you could take that item that's going to put you over the expertise cap, reforge some of the expertise off of 1 to 2 items, and everything's good again. Now, none of that's a big deal when it comes to spell power and reforging. It's just something you've got to get used to if you plan on playing. And as I say, the main thing it does is makes everything a bit more simple when you're gearing because DPS casters want intellect, a hybrid DPS like a Boomy or a Shadow Priest wants int and spirit. That's a bit of an interesting one because spirit is needed by them because their spirit converts into hit rating, so it's less hit that they need to get. And healers also want int and spirit because spirit gives MP5, intellect gives crit and spell power, as we already know, as well as increasing your mana pool. Back to the good stuff though. The introduction of archaeology giving you some seriously good items, mounts, pets and toys is a real big positive. I absolutely love archaeology. I think it's something quite cool to do just in downtime. It gives a bunch of achievements, bind on account items, and even some decent looking mounts that you're probably going to want to get. It also gives a lot of reason to see people flying flying around in the old world. You'll see people in Ashenvale or Tanaris or Silithus and everywhere in between just flying around doing archaeology. And because the dig sites can be used by multiple people, it will actually just make the classic zones feel that little bit more alive, which I think is a really positive thing. The whole revamp of the glyph system, where you don't have to constantly buy the same glyphs every time you respec or want to change something, is quite cool as well. You want to fill your talent tree up with all of the glyphs that you can physically obtain, and then you can just change them on the fly whenever you want using a Dust of Disappearance. And a Dust of Disappearance is made by Inscription. And let's not forget the addition of Prime Glyphs. This is one change where I don't quite understand what the point of it was, but your Prime Glyphs are the big glyphs that really have an impact to your abilities, like Divine Favor getting an extra 10 seconds, or Exorcism doing 20% of its damage over 6 seconds, whereas major glyphs are more for your defensive or utility abilities, and then minor glyphs are pretty much the same as minor glyphs in Wrath. It would have been nice for them to just stick to major and minor. Instead, now you get 3 prime, 3 major, and 3 minor. While we're on that, we should really talk about the talents. Now, I think people get confused when it comes to Cataclysm and they actually think it's Mr. Pandaria, where the talents went down to a choice of a row of 3. What it actually is more or less vanilla talent tree size, so sort of 2019 talent trees in terms of getting down to the bottom, but fleshing out all of the useless talents where you get like 1% crit and it takes 5 points to get 5%. Now all the talents are just a lot more meaningful. The one major change to this though is you do need to spend 31 talent points in a single tree before you can move into the other trees. You don't have to go all the way to the bottom, so it doesn't mean you have to take Light of Dawn to move into the other trees. You just have to have spent 31 points. So if I took Light of Dawn out but put one in Blessed Life, I would still then be able to go into the protection tree to start getting Divinity or Eternal Glory or whatever else that I want. It does mean you couldn't go down to Holy and get Divine Favor and then start moving down into protection to get Sanctuary and then move down into Retribution to get Seals of Command, for example. You have to basically achieve the bottom of one tree in terms of points spent before you can move into another. I personally don't see a problem with that. A lot of people say, oh, you know, it removes flexibility and, you know, you're making niche specs and stuff like that. I do kind of get that, but I do also argue how many people actually do that. If you're Feral, you're trying to get down to Mangle as quickly as possible and then Berserk. You know, if you're Ret, you're trying to get to the bottom to get Divine Storm. If you're Shadow Priest, you're trying to get down to get Vampiric Touch. You know, you're racing to get down to the bottom of that talent tree to get that big ability anyway. So by locking you into it until you spent 31 points where you'll technically be at the bottom, I don't really see a problem with it, but I also don't really understand why they did it, because whilst leveling, it would have made for some interesting weird specs, or even while raiding. So that could actually be something that Blizzard, when it comes to Cataclysm, consider changing, because it would be funny to see what weird specs could possibly come out of that. There is so much more I could cover, but this video would end up being miles too long. And let's be honest, I'd probably then not have a lot to talk about in future videos. Gotta string it out, get as many videos as possible. So if you enjoyed the video, like and subscribe. I'm looking forward to Cata. If you want to see me playing some, Scottejaye87 on Twitch. I'll see you on the next one.